Welcome to Inverse Happy Hour, everyone. My name is Jake, and I'm here with Alma Katsu, author of her new book, The Deep, also previously The Hunger. She's a really great horror author who's also an expert in emerging technology, so we're going to talk about both.
Woo.
I'm very excited. And if you have any questions for Alma about writing, about tech, about horror, just put them in the comments and I will ask them. And of course, stick around because we're going to finish this off with a reading from her new book, The Deep, which should be very scary, and I'm excited for it. To start, so The Deep is a supernatural story. You write about supernatural stuff. Have you ever had a supernatural experience in your own life?
God, I wish I could say yes. I think I'm just kind of predisposed for horror stories because I grew up in New England. It's a super spooky little town. I mean, really spooky. It was a very small town, but I think I'd heard it was in the Guinness Book of World Records at one point for having the most cemeteries per square mile. I mean, and these old, really creepy cemeteries. From my house, there was a funeral parlor in two different directions in one within a block. And I lived in this old Victorian that we swore it was haunted, but we were kids, a lot of imagination. But no, I can't say that I've ever had a real supernatural experience myself.
Fair enough. It's like Stephen King syndrome, I guess. But do you believe in ghosts?
You know, I don't know. I think I haven't made up my mind on that. My husband loves those ghost hunter shows, so we've been watching them for at least a decade, right? And you're hopeful. You watch and you're hopeful you're going to see something that's
Well, it's not too late. Uh, Again, if you're just joining us, this is Inverse Happy Hour. We've got Alma Katsu, fantastic horror author, talking, answering questions. Feel free to ask some in the comments. And we already have one about the emergence of medical technology in hospitals. I'm curious what you think about that field and where you see it going.
well, that's probably an area I can't really too much. So just so people know
Yeah, what's your expertise?
yeah, I advise the government on particular emerging technologies that'll have the potential to impact the business of intelligence work. And believe it or not, we don't really do that much with medical stuff. I mean, you can probably believe it. We could go into that. There's certain things that they're kind of interested in, but not so much medical technologies per se. The emergence of artificial intelligence and the use of that in medicine is very interesting. That's really taking off now. As you know, artificial intelligence requires a lot of data. And so that's a little bit of, people are a little unsure about that. Health data is very personal data. It could, if they can, de-anonymize it, they can learn some really potentially devastating things about individuals. So, new technologies, going in new frontiers, they're not without their challenges.
Yeah, it's a little scary for sure, that kind of stuff. Speaking of scary, we've got a question from Evan. Who's your favorite fictional ghost? And is it Casper?
Well, I have a soft spot in my heart for Casper.
Who doesn't?
Right? Who doesn't? He's such a nice guy. Geez, I don't know that I have so many ghosts, so many ghosts. Ghost and Mrs. Muir. I don't know. I want my ghost to be really dashing and sort of Lord Byron-esque, I think.
Okay. Like a handsome ghost.
A
Probably
handsome,
good. Sorry, Casper.
devil. Yeah.
We got another question from Hey Look Shiny Thing is their username, and they wanted to know what led you to write your previous book, The Hunger. What was the influence?
Well, I mean, the event itself, like a lot of Americans, I thought I knew the story of the Donner Party. But once I really started researching it, I realized I didn't know it at all. And it wasn't just what happened on that mountaintop, that led to a lot of cannibalism. It really started 1,400 miles earlier. And even before they made it to what was called the jumping off point, when you think about what they were doing, going into the total unknown, it's not like there's roads or any communication or anything, and leaving behind everything they knew, you have to wonder what would drive somebody to do something like that. So it was sort of looking at these people and trying to figure out what was their motivation for leaving. And then also so many crazy things happened along the way, people dying and, under weird, mysterious circumstances. They were killing each other for money. Yeah, just dropping people who were and elderly on the side of the road as things started to get tough. It was really, yeah, it's a
Wow.
crazy trip.
Sounds like the cannibalism was maybe not even the most surprising part of it.
Right. And yeah. And unfortunately, I couldn't even put everything that was so wacky in the book. At a certain point, my editor looked at me and she said, Alma, a little bleak goes a long way. So I'm cutting out some of the earlier bleak stuff. But still, I think it's a rollicking good story with just
Nice.
a little bit of cannibalism.
You can't, just a little bit is perfect. I do know that that book was picked up for a movie adaptation with Ridley Scott's son involved. Can you give us any updates on what's going on there? Are you involved in the adaptation?
Not at all. I could give you an update. I think it's in something called development hell. Um,
Ah, sounds
yeah.
like fun.
Yeah. Who knows if and when it'll ever see the light of day. But yeah, it was really thrilling. That was my first ever film sale. So yeah, very thrilling.
Uh, that's very cool. All right, again, if you're just joining us, this is Inverse Happy Hour. We're talking to Alma Katsu about her fiction. She just released The Deep. We're drinking some gin, some bourbon. She's also a technology expert, specifically with sort of government and security, I believe.
Yeah, my
So,
pay
if
is
you have any questions about that stuff,
in big data. So yeah,
big data.
yeah.
Um,
Do we even call it big data anymore? We just call it data.
it's just all data, yeah.
Data.
So I have a question for you, which is just more broadly, what is it about horror? I mean, I know you mentioned growing up in New England, but what else about horror appeals to you?
Well, life is horrible. I mean, I
I guess so. Look
adapt.
around.
So, I've been a technologist the last 12 years or so, but the vast majority of my time in intelligence was spent working more traditional intelligence topics. And a big part of that was humanitarian and disasters, and that includes genocides and mass atrocities. So for
Hmm.
a long time during the golden
Wow.
age of genocides, it was really fun work, let me tell you. And it exposes you to, people can do really horrible, horrible things. And so I do have sort of maybe this dark outlook on life,
Interesting.
by which horror, conventional horror writing and filmmaking kind of pales, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. That's actually an interesting connection. I like it. That's the outlet. All right, here's another question from the audience from M. Herman. What are the best majors for cybersecurity? Do you have any
Oh,
suggestions for college majors?
this is terrible. I call myself a tech expert, but every tech you bring up, I have to sort of defer. I'm not a cyber expert, and it's evolving so quickly as a field.
Hmm.
There's a lot of specializations, that sort of thing. There's a lot of great, great programs out there. I know that, but unfortunately, I don't think I can really advise somebody at this point. If there's a particular subfield that they want to go into.
Fair enough. I guess just maybe do some research, Mr. Herman.
Sorry about that.
But
If anybody
check
wants,
out inverse.com. We got a lot of info about cybersecurity. I'm sure that's a good place
there
to
you go.
start.
NSA, they'll tell you actually.
Yeah. Again, if you're joining us, this is Inverse Happy Hour with Alma Katsu. My name is Jake. We're talking about her new book, The Deep. And I wanted to ask a question. So The Deep is related, is set partially or involves the Titanic.
Yes.
And it's like the Titanic meets Ghost. So I'm curious, when you were doing research on the Titanic, did you learn anything new about that story that you didn't know before?
Well, I have to admit, I wasn't actually a big Titanic fan growing up. And where the idea for the book came from was my husband was watching this documentary of a dive to the Britannic, and they mentioned it was the sister ship of the Titanic, and I had never even known there was a sister ship. And so then I sat down to watch the documentary with them, and they announced that there's a woman who survived both sinkings. Well, I don't even have to know that woman's story to know there's a horror novel in this book. right? It's like finding out your neighbor and his brother were both serial killers. You know, there's going to be a great story in it. So that's actually where the idea for it came from. So as I was doing the research, I really learned a lot of amazing things. I think it's hard sometimes for modern people to sort of wrap their heads around, you know, what made a wonder of the previous era, right? The size of the ship, you know, they touted it as being, you know, unsinkable, the technology
Mhm.
that went into it. Yeah, it just amazing. But the most amazing thing actually is the people.
Yeah.
Um, in order to get a sense of which real people I would pull into the story, I read like little thumbnail bios on all of them. That's 2,300
Wow.
people. And what fascinated me was like every single one of them was more interesting than the people you meet today. I don't know if they just had like really amazing lives back then or what, but there are just so many really interesting, great characters, you know, among all of the passengers. We all hear about the, you know, the famous first class passengers like the Astors and Benjamin
Sure.
Guggenheim and all those folks. But yeah, there are just really a lot of memorable characters throughout the book. I mean, throughout the passengers and the crew.
I'm sure in the book too, but there are lots of them.
Well, we try.
Uh, Here we got a question from John Koval, who thanks John because he's always tuning in and asking questions. Which here's another tech question. So let's see if we can get something going on. Will AI make coding obsolete? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Gee, some people say that GitHub is going to make coding obsolete because all you have to do is go to GitHub,
Oh
pull.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's some talk about that. Is it really, I don't, you know, not for the foreseeable future. As far
Sure.
as is concerned, yeah, that's an interesting question. But um, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where AI is going. It seems to evolve so fast.
Yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
to predict, but I guess that is that's part of your job,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
or it was.
um, yeah, you know, we haven't made that kind of prediction. It's
Mm,
anyway, sorry.
it's
Maybe I
fine.
should
No,
stop this. I can't answer.
it's
Ask me
all good.
about surveillance. That I can tell you all about. Any,
Surveillance.
you know,
What's something that we probably don't think about when it comes to surveillance technology currently?
well, I mean, I think a lot of people these days are pretty savvy, right, about how much information
Hmm.
is being gathered on us. You know,
Yeah.
my particular area that I spend more time on has to do with data analytics. So, you know, most, you know, anything from social media to, you know, advertising, what pushes the adverts to you on your phone. It's not just siloed information. That is, for instance, in the old days, you know, Google, what Google would know about you was what they might have learned from, you know, if you had Android system or Chrome, right?
Yeah.
Facebook was just through the Facebook silo. Now everybody buys outside data up
Mm.
to thousands. I mean, it was a few years ago that Facebook was using 95 other data streams to pull in additional data to enrich what they were already getting off the Facebook platform. And I think, I'm sure by now that's gone up quite a bit. And that's
Yeah.
why, you know, the quality of things, of recommendations and stuff that are being pushed to people are so much better than they used to be. But then you added in, you
Interesting.
know, add in all the other stuff that's going on. Um, you know, especially visual surveillance now is really stepping up. It's going to be very hard to have a private life in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Um, do you see those UFO videos that were released recently? Do you have any thoughts on those?
I didn't. I'm so
Oh
sorry.
man, they're pretty good. I recommend them. Anyone watching, check out the UFO videos released by the Pentagon last week. This week,
Were you convinced?
it's something. It's that video of the UFO kind of like does a 90-degree angle in midair. It's I don't know what I was looking at. All right, so let's thanks everyone. This is Inverse Happy Hour, and we've been talking to Alma. We're gonna do a quick post-apocalyptic lightning round. Ask some fun questions about what might happen in the post-apocalypse, and then we'll jump to the reading of The Deep, her new book. All right, question number one, related to AI, like we were talking about before. If the singularity happened, would you upload your brain to a computer and live forever, given the choice?
So I'm a little inclined to think that if we get to that point, we won't be in charge of saying whether our brains will be uploaded or not. That somebody else is going to be making
Hmm.
those decisions. I don't think I don't think I would make the cut.
Fair.
If I had a choice, I don't know that I would do it either.
Hmm.
I mean, it would be interesting to experience it. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, who runs it, right? Would it be a government system? Would it be a private system? I've worked for the government for a long time. Forever is not what we think it's going to be, right? I mean, it's going to crash in 10 years at the utmost. You know, forever is going to be maybe 15 years old, and then something dreadful is going to happen. So
Yeah, good point.
I'm
Well,
a downer. Yeah.
all right, next question. If there was a zombie apocalypse, where would you go to try to survive?
I don't know that any place is safe in a zombie apocalypse. So one wonderful thing is about being retired. I retired from the government. Is we're starting to look to like retirement. So we're building a cabin out in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. So I think I would go there. We'd be pretty safe for a
Yeah.
while. I have to point out that's why my shelves are so empty is because we're moving and I'm
Ah,
packing. Not that I don't own
to
books.
prepare for the apocalypse. Smart.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Would you go colonize Mars if given the choice, knowing that you could never come back to the Earth?
That really sounds like a lot of work. I don't know.
Yeah, not going to be easy.
I don't know that I'm up for that. I'll be honest. Yeah, I don't know.
Fair. Would you rather be a robot with a heart or a human without a heart?
Could I be a robot without a heart?
Well,
I'd,
I
I'd,
guess so.
I'd be a
Is
robot.
that the ultimate goal? Is just a heartless robot?
It sounds kind of fun. Like you could be a supervillain or something, right? But
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
supervillain, I think, is much more fun than hero. But I'd probably be a robot with a heart, though.
Fair. We've got one lightning round question from the audience, so I'm going to pass that along. Do you think that if nuclear fallout devastated the Earth, there was a nuclear apocalypse, would cannibalism eventually take hold?
Good question. I mean, I think for some period of time, but the body,
Hmm.
speeding along your own demise. I mean, you've got to just look at it as a possibility.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things when I was writing The Hunger is, you had to kind of look into cannibalism, and it wasn't as not prevalent. Let's just say that back in the old days, for the main reason was ships. It was part of the law of the sea. If you were shipwrecked, you were in a lifeboat, you could actually, eat one of the members of the lifeboat in order to
Oh,
save life. I think they wanted that person to be dead, but there were instances of drawing straws. And
sure. Ideally, yeah.
so those stories were in the newspapers, and I think so people understood, or you just heard about cannibalism a little bit more than you
Huh.
knew.
It was a little more normal. That's
A
interesting.
little more normal.
All right. Well, thanks so much for playing post-apocalyptic lightning round and answering questions. Thanks everyone for sticking around. All right. So let's get to the deep. I'm excited to hear. Is this just we're gonna just get the first few pages,
Just a
correct?
few pages. And as mentioned, this is a sort of a reimagining of the story of the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic and its sister ship, the Britannic, with just this little horror twist.
All right. Take it away.
18 September 1916. For the attention of the director, Morningate Asylum, Liverpool. Dear Sir, I write in the hope that you may be of assistance in a very sensitive matter. My dear daughter Annie disappeared unexpectedly from our home in the little village of Ballantoy 4 years ago. My wife and I have been searching for her ever since. We have made inquiries of hospitals and convalescent facilities, as our daughter was in a distraught state when we last saw her and suffering from injury, perhaps of a more grievous nature than we thought at the time. We began with facilities close to us, in Belfast and Lisburn and Bangor, but when we failed to locate her, we worked our way out, eventually crossing the Irish Sea to Liverpool. We wrote to 55 hospitals in all. Having met with no luck, it was suggested that we might expand our inquiries to facilities such as your own. Since childhood, our Annie has always been extraordinarily sensitive to the emotions possessed by all members of her sex. These emotions, however, can be both a blessing and a curse. A woman without these qualities would be a cold, heartless thing indeed, but to be possessed of too much love is no kindness. As her father, I at times cannot help but wish there had been a way to temper this quality in my dear Annie. And so I write to you, kind sir, to inquire as to whether there might be a woman in your establishment matching my Annie's description. She would be 22 years of age and stand 5 foot 6 inches tall. She is a shy, soft-spoken lass who can go a week without a word to anyone. I pray that you will be able to end our nightmare and return our Annie to us. Yes, in a word, she ran away from the home we provided for her, but we suspect that it is merely her own fear of censure that keeps her away. Please know, sir, that we are pursuing this matter outside the law in order to preserve Annie's privacy and dignity. I pray that we may count on your discretion. I imagine, in your position, you see a goodly number of women in situations like my Annie's. She is our only daughter, and despite her frailties, her weaknesses, despite anything she may have done, we love her dearly. Tell her that her brothers pray nightly for her return, and her room remains exactly as she left it, in the hope that we will take her again in her family's loving embrace. Yours respectfully, Jonathan Hebley, Ballantoy, Civil Parish, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. 25 September 1916, Morningate Asylum, Liverpool. Dear Mr. Hebley, I received your touching letter concerning your daughter Annie Friday last week. While I am not unsympathetic to your tragic situation, I regret to say that I am unable to cooperate. The Lunacy Act of 1890 has wrought many changes in the legal constraints governing institutions such as Morningate. The Act has driven facilities to create hitherto unimagined internal policies designed, in my opinion, to protect the institution against spurious legal claims rather than for the benefit of its patients. At Morningate, these policies extend to safeguarding our patients' privacy. It is for this reason that I must respectfully decline to answer. It is a matter, you see, of protecting the privacy of the afflicted, who often suffer greatly due to the general public's prejudices against those with disorders of the nerves and mind. Please do not construe this reply as either affirmation or denial of knowledge of your daughter's presence at Morningate. As administrator of this institution, I am bound by law. Your servant, Nigel Davenport, Physician and Director, Morningate Asylum, Byshore Mews, Liverpool, England. Chapter 1, October 1916, Morningate Asylum, Liverpool. She is not mad. Annie Hebley pokes her needle into the coarse gray linen, a soft color like the feathers of the doves that entrap themselves in the chimneys here, fluttering and crying out, sometimes battering themselves to death in a vain effort to escape. She is not mad. Annie's eyes follow the needle as it runs the length of the hem, weaving in and out of fabric, in and out, in and out, sharp and shining and so precise. But there is something in her that is hospitable to madness. Annie has come to understand the erratic ways of the insane, the crying fits, incoherent babblings, violent flinging of hands and feet. There is, after days and weeks and years, a kind of comforting rhythm to them. But no, she is not one of them. Of that she is certain. As certain as the Lord and the Blessed Virgin, her da might have said. There are a dozen female patients hunched over their sewing, making the room warm and stuffy despite the meagerness of the fire. Work is thought to be palliative to nervous disorders, so many of the inmates are given jobs, particularly those who are here due more to their own poverty than any ailment of mind or body. While most of the indigent are kept in workhouses, Annie has learned, quite a few make their way to the asylums instead, if there are empty beds to keep them, not to mention the women of sin. Whatever their reasons for turning up at Morningate, most of the women here are meek enough and bend themselves to the nurse's direction. But there are few of whom Annie is truly afraid. She pulls in tight to herself as she works, not wanting to brush up against them, unable to shake the suspicion that madness might pass from person to person like a disease, that it festers the way a fine mold grows inside a milk bottle left too long in the sun, undetectable at first, but soon souring and corrupting until all the milk is spoiled. Annie sits on a hard little stool in the needle room with her morning's labor puddled in her lap. But it is the letter tucked inside her pocket that brushes up against her thoughts unwillingly, a glowing ember burning through the linen of her dress. Annie recognized the handwriting before she even saw the name on the envelope. She has reread it now at least a dozen times. In the dark cover of night, when no one is looking, she kisses it like a crucifix. As if drawn to the sin of Annie's thoughts, a nurse materializes at her shoulder. Annie wonders how long she has been standing there, studying her. This one is new. She doesn't know Annie yet, not well anyway. They leave Annie to the late arrivals on staff, who haven't yet learned to be frightened of her. Annie, dear, Dr. Davenport would like to see you. I'm to escort you to his office. Annie rises from her stool. None of the other women glance up from their sewing. The nurses never turn their backs to the patients of Morninggate, so Annie shuffles down the corridor, the nurse's presence like a hot poker at her back. If Annie could get a moment alone, she might get rid of the letter. Stash it behind the drapes, tuck it under the carpet runner. She mustn't let the doctor find it. Just thinking of it again sends a tingle of shame through her body. But she is never alone at Morninggate.